college professor gets up before his class and says he doesn't believe in God. He says, okay, if there is a God, let him knock me off this stage. And the class is shocked. He's like, come on, God. He starts taunting God. Come on, knock me off this stage. You say you're out there. You say you're all powerful. Come on, do something right here and now. Time's passing and nothing's happening, and he's getting more and more out there with how he's provoking and all this stuff, when all of a sudden a tackle on the football team starts walking by and listens inside, comes in, lowers his shoulder, and knocks that teacher way off the stage. And the teacher's like, what did you do that for? And he goes, well, God was busy, so he sent me. Isn't that how it works? God shows up in mysterious ways. My talk for this week is collective consciousness. And my point about it is that we in our movement talk about what's called race consciousness, which is really just how we are impacted by any group of people. And what my point is that we are on the precipice of creating a new consciousness that we get to create so that we are not being impacted by the old consciousness that we have been impacted by, whatever that consciousness might be, because we're all been, on some level, unless we are completely conscious in every given moment, impacted by something that we're unaware of. I mean, that's when we go unconscious. That's what's happening. When we go on automatic, it's not really automatic, right? When we go on automatic, it's like we're falling into the slot, the default of whatever it is we grew up with, whether we really, in our conscious mind, believe it or not. And then we perceive and behave and express ourselves in ways that afterwards we go, whoa. What just happened there? Oh, yeah, I went unconscious. Am I the only one that happens to? Is there anybody out there who might experience the fact that at different times we feel our consciousness awareness at different levels? You know, one of the things I impress upon folks is that enlightenment is not the game here. Because we were enlightened before we were born. And then we chose to come into this body. And we'll be enlightened after we leave it. The game isn't enlightenment, it's awareness, spiritual awareness. Because the more spiritually aware we are, whether we're enlightened fully in every moment or not, the more we get to play with the powers that be in a way that serves life. Not just our lives, but all of life. And one of the best parts about going up to a ministers' gathering is I get to gather with other people who have taken on the calling of bringing forth a message of love in life. And we get to share our different degrees of success at doing that. And one of the best parts about this particular weekend was the theme was authenticity. And so many people got up and shared about what was true for them. And what I noticed is that a lot of ministers, even though the theme was authenticity, would get up and share to make sure that they were expressing themselves from that part of themselves that only saw light and goodness. And for me, I don't only see light and goodness. Sometimes I wake up in a bad mood. My wife will vouch for it. Not fun to be around. I go into treatment work, I do my prayer work, I do my meditation work in the morning, and then I shift back around, and life is okay again. Then something happens during the day. Like yesterday, one of my software programs decided to stop working, right when I thought I was going to get some real work done. It didn't work for 2 hours. I might have gotten a little frazzled. Luckily, I have these teachings to fall back on. But more than that, what I'm starting to see more and more, and why I call this talk collective consciousness, is I recognize that I am not alone. And so the message I bring to you today is that you are not alone. That there are people all over the world who are seeking to bring out in themselves their best and highest self, and are wanting to join in a collective consciousness that becomes the new default instead of the fear and pain and worry that has been the default of the past. That you are part of a group that wants to grow in consciousness and through that impact life. Now, I have to tell you that my relationship to CSL as an organization has been bumpy at best. And so I have, in many ways, through the years, separated myself from the organization and thought, I am, and hardly given them a second thought, because I thought what this was about was simply getting done what we could do here as our spiritual community. What I got reminded of this weekend was that every single time I or anybody else uses the word they for home office, I'm really saying we. Because they're not any different than us in terms of being in a community that wants to raise consciousness on the planet. Now, maybe there are people in your world that you call they who are really we. I mean, who, when it comes to humanity, isn't? And so I, this weekend, amongst many others, had an opportunity to reestablish our larger community. And in doing so, got a sense of what that collective consciousness, what was possible, what could come out of it. We took time to create affirmations for our larger community and how it feeds the world. We have a vision in our community, say a world that works for everyone. And so as we were creating affirmations, I realized if we're really going to take that to its nth degree, then it's already done. That it's our job to actually hold a consciousness that sees a world that works for everyone, that holds that mental equivalent, that holds that level of consciousness. Now, for many of us who are struggling in our own personal lives, seeing it larger than our lives can be difficult. If you're out of work, just broken up out of a relationship, have a diagnosis, have no money in the bank, how do you hold on to the larger community when you're dealing with that? And I'm here to tell you that it feeds each other. That the more I notice for myself as I breathe into the larger community, the more I feel fed by it. And all of a sudden, home office isn't a they, it's a we, and everything is flowing in a way that actually works. And when I think about that, when I think about how I am not alone, when I think about how you are not alone, I rest in a field. It's not like there's just one flower sitting all by itself. There may be some distance between the flowers and physical space, but when it comes to consciousness, there's no distance at all. Between us and the Agape Center, and the center in Simi Valley, and the center in South Africa, and the center in New York, and the center in New Zealand. And then you get even larger than that, and you start thinking there is a consciousness around unity that is very similar to ours in terms of what we want to see in the world. And then England, Germany, there are people everywhere yearning for a new life, a new collective consciousness that then feeds our own personal consciousness. That's why Dr. Holmes talked about it as the subjective. He didn't call it the objective. He called it the subjective because each of us has a unique experience of this consciousness. It is ours. It is personal. And yet is part of a collective whole that the more we can remember that, the more we consciously feed that, can feed you, can feed us. That's what I walked away from this weekend. So at one point, I got up to speak my authenticity, and I started talking about how that my authenticity is complex, because if somebody asks me how I'm doing in any particular given moment, I'm doing great. Well, I might be struggling. Well, I also might be having a hard time with something, but I'm doing great and feeling good. And all that is going on at once, and nobody wants to hang out long enough to hear all I have to say about how I'm doing, because they got a life to lead. And then I went on to talk about Sunday mornings and how you get up, and my job is to inspire. But some days, honestly, I wake up not inspired. But I need to get to where I'm inspired because I got to show up here on Sundays and be inspiring. And that's part of it too, right? And when you're and that in bringing all that to the world is what goes on for so many other people in the collective consciousness, and knowing that I'm not alone. I mean, the amount of people who came up to me after I talked, including our spiritual leader, Dr. Ken, who, when it was his turn to share on a particular evening, started out the evening talking about what I had shared about authenticity, and saying that it was like I picked it right out of his mind. And he wasn't the only one that felt that way. Because what we have here is a collective consciousness. What we have here is a sense of each other, that we all go through stuff, and yet we all have the ability to rise. And we're not alone. You know, it feels really good to know we're not alone when we're feeling alone. I went out and lived in a cabin in the woods for 2 years, and by myself and my dog at the time, and it was just the two of us for these 2 years. My son passing through once in a while, but mostly it was by myself. And the thing about it was, what was really funny about it was I never felt alone, because when you're in the woods, it's really easy to feel the collective consciousness even more than when you're in an urban city, when people are driving by and all the drama and everything's going on. It can feel very isolating, and yet it's the same in the sense that it's there. You know, it's all about our willingness to take the moment, the time. You know, they talk about taking a moment to smell the roses. Well, I say take a moment to feel the collective consciousness, because it exists. And it's working towards a new way of being for everyone. And any of us who are willing to take a moment to key into that will get to feel that in that moment we take the time to do it. And that's the beauty of this, is that it's always there. You know, I hear people talking about love that way too, and I think it's true that love is simply something that exists, and it's up to us to take the time to breathe it in and remember that it's right here around us. I heard a great joke the other day about, I mean, and not like it's gonna crack you up so much, but what it said was, it was about a fish swimming in the water, goes by other fish and goes, "Man, doesn't the water feel great today?" And the other fish go, "What's water?" Because a lot of times when you're surrounded by something, you don't even, you know, you're used, it's like the air. You know, it's like you wouldn't know what it was like until the moment you didn't have any, to know what it's like to not have it present. Then all of a sudden, you know, it's like a fish out of water. All of a sudden recognizes, oh, that must have been water and I need to get back there. And and doesn't it feel that way with consciousness sometimes? when you're sinking, like, oh my God, I feel so alone and feel so stuck. I need to get back to that place where I felt so good and open and felt so free in the sense of the beauty of consciousness that's always present, just like air around you all the time, around us all the time, just going on. And so, we went through this process at this gathering. First of all, you may not know this about me, but I'm actually shy and kind of a loner. And I know I don't come off that way, but I'm an introvert. And at groups, when I get together with groups, unless I'm the one presenting, I tend to be off to the side and not say much to anybody, and promised myself and promised my assistant minister that I would actually interact with people. And so I was inviting people I'd never met before to breakfast and got invited to lunch. I got to hang out with Christian Sorensen, and if you don't know that name, he's an icon in our movement. And he sent me an email the other day about how much fun he had hanging out. We were cracking each other up so much. And I would have never known that if I hadn't invited him to lunch, if I hadn't been willing to reach out of my comfort zone. And so that's the other piece of this, is when we want to be in that collective consciousness, we need to be willing to not do what we always did that left us feeling alone. And so, Einstein talks about that, saying you can't solve a problem with the same thinking that caused the problem in the first place. Well, that's true here around consciousness. You can't lock into, feel, breathe into that new consciousness with your old consciousness. And so the transition of that paradigm could feel very uncomfortable. It did for me, to go up to Kristen and ask, hey, you want to go do lunch? And then we wound up hanging out the entire afternoon together, cracking each other up. And to where now he's inviting me down and get together with our wives. And so that was a blast. And so we got together in the afternoon as everybody was, these 125 ministers from around the world are taking the time to be outside their comfort zone, because that was part of what we were tasked to do at this gathering, and reach a place where people were speaking about home office in ways that were very derogatory. And the person facilitating all this did it in a way that was really brilliant in terms of allowing for that kind of space. But also for the ministers who were there, who worked at home office, it was very hurtful. And so then they got space to express that, because in the collective consciousness, you have to give room for all the sides. And that's one of the hard parts about when our new collective consciousness is when we see things we really don't like. We see things that we think are so bad and wrong that we actually close down the new consciousness that can arrive if it doesn't have the room to include it all. So the new consciousness that's coming forward has to be more inclusive than the old consciousness that we don't like, that wasn't. And that's one of the things we don't like about it. Not so easy to do. But when we were able to do that as a group and saw that these people at home office whose feelings were hurt by the derogatory things that other people were saying, a new compassion arose out of that. And there was an embracing of we that actually was brand new for our movement. Had never come forth like that before in our movement. And so the collective consciousness actually rose in that moment in a way that everybody just looked around the room at each other and could see, wow, this is new. This is a new consciousness. This is a level that we had not yet reached before as a movement. And so now that exists for all of us. Now we all get to play in this new realm of inclusivity. where instead of looking at groups that we don't like, that we think are wrong, and want to somehow throw up boundaries and borders to keep those people away, we remember that it's we. Hard to do with some of the things that go on in this world. And yet, that's the healing consciousness. And that was the healing that I experienced this weekend with this group of ministers. That we actually experienced a healing with home office, with each other, with two organizations, one called RSI and the other called United, that were kind of thrown together in a way that made a mishmash and a chaos of things. And there was still a lot of resentment around that actually healed, or at least had the beginnings of that. Okay, because, everything sounds so healed and everybody's, flower power and all that kind of stuff. But then there's the real work to do, which is when those bad feelings arise again and again and again. And that's where the true authenticity comes into play, where then we get to feel for ourselves what's true for me now? What's true for me now? Maybe what's true for me now is I'm not feeling so good about things. But as soon as I recognize that, now I have an opportunity to go, okay, that's my old consciousness. What do I need to do to breathe in the new one? And I'm not alone here. It's all around me. It's coming from all over the world. I have the power of the universe at my disposal in this moment to shift my consciousness. And in doing so, shift my life. And in doing so, shift life, period. Because every time you shift your life, every single time, life shifts for everyone on some level. And the more we can do that, the more this new collective consciousness becomes palpable. Every time we shift, we are adding to that new place of beingness that is possible. We're adding to that new place of yum. We're adding to that new place of love. We're adding to what it is we want to see in the world by being that. That's what's really possible here when we remind ourselves as often as we can that there is a collective consciousness beyond any other consciousness that is growing in numbers, growing in power, growing in strength. And every time we move into that, we get to feel that. We get to be a part of that. And we get to grow with that. And with that, critical mass is coming. I want you to know that. I know it with absolute certainty. I can't tell you when. I can tell you it'll be the perfect and right time. And that I trust in that. Critical mass is coming. And it's for us to know it's already done. I love you. Thank you. All right. So, this is the time where we use our collective consciousness to pray on one of our own right here. Oh, by the way, before I forget, Julie, I know you're out there, and I love you. We have a practitioner in Cincinnati who serves this community and does it from Cincinnati. And I just wanted to acknowledge you today. Okay, who's going to come up here and have the courage to let us pray on you, know the truth for you? Come on. This is the part where people get healed right here and now. Come on down. O'Day, right? Okay, please tell us what you'd like us to pray for, O'Day. Here.
I have anxiety attacks. I had to take Xanax to get here today. And I'm so tired of it. And I'd like to really let it go because it's been a big disability in my life. So that's what I'd like help with.
Thank you. All right, 8 to 10 folks, come on up. Lay hands on O'Day.
Sings out to you, my soul sings out to you, my love, my soul sings out to you, my soul sings out to you, my love, my soul sings out to you.
I am so grateful for the power and presence of our spiritual family and the peace and the love that O'Day feels and embodies right here, right now. That love, that healing essence entering every cell of his body, knowing true healing. I am so, so grateful for the power and presence and the gift that O'Day is to life. As we all say together, and so it is. That is the power of spiritual community and collective consciousness. Whew. All right. Take out what you're going to give. Hold it in your hand. Doesn't matter whether it's $1, $10, $100, $1,000, deeds of property, gold mines, diamonds. Hold it in your hand. Its power, its presence as it moves, and we all say together, God is the source of all supply. Money is God in action. What I give, I receive multiplied abundantly. All that God is, I am, and so it is.